is my great personal honor to present the 44th President of these United States, Barack Obama.
Any president is important. Obama is important for a number of reasons, many of them tied to who he is as a man. So because he's the first mixed race president, the first president that has had a significant life history outside of America before he becomes president, the fact that he represents so much emotion and expectation, and he comes after a president, George W. Bush, who's widely regarded as a failure. Even before you get to the specifics of what Obama does, his presidency was met with a huge amount of anticipation, and that makes him a very important president in modern American history.
He was a pioneer in changing the political face of the presidency, and that will make it in the medium term and the long term a lot easier for other black candidates or minority candidates, Hispanics or whatever, to follow in his footsteps, because he's obviously shown that it can be done.
When he was first elected, there was remarkable sort of optimism that he was the first African-American president. He represented a fundamentally different way of campaigning and organising. He kind of really engaged with the Democratic grassroots.
Obama is all about thought, and what he needed was to try and develop a bit more of a gut. I think there's a problem if you're only gut and no thought, big problem. But if you're only thought and no gut, big problem. And it does mean he leaves office with a Syrian civil war that's killed hundreds of thousands of men, women and children. Not all because America doesn't intervene, but largely because he refuses to use American military power. He draws and creates a red line which he then turns pink. He won't stand for. So his indecision, I think, you've got to account for.
I think one of his biggest failings actually is not dealing with Syria when it first started to turn from peaceful protests into violent government repression of those protests in sort of mid-2011. At that point, there was a clear case for some kind of international pressure led by America to really kind of coerce Assad to step back.
I think his campaign, the thing that disturbed me most about his administration was his drone warfare campaign, where he went around and Trump continued this, dropping drone bombs on his political enemies and targets, so-called terrorist targets, particularly in the Middle East.
I think his biggest flaw as president was his inability to get Congress to come along on those issues, and in many ways that inability to convince Republicans in Congress that they could work with him.
So his accomplishments were, we could say, they're built on sand. They weren't built on a consensus. If you want to do anything in America, it requires a consensus. So enough people in the middle, which means across both parties, have to agree it's the right thing to do. And the Iran deal never commanded that consensus, which is why Trump, even though it's controversial, has been able, literally with a stroke of a pen, to repeal it. So I think that's, again, suggests that Obama, he was more hope than he was actually, than he was achievement, solid legislative achievement.
You think about Obama in the years ahead and get asked to nominate what his great achievements were, a lot of them will be about him as a person, as opposed to any policy achievements that he may have actually made at the time. And that's probably a fairly good summary of how his legacy will be seen in the years ahead. Well, people will say that one of his legacies is Trump. So if you can judge him, if you want to judge him really harshly, you will say that he prepared the conditions for Trump to come to power, and therefore failed to provide his own side of politics with the opportunity to extend their control of the presidency. So that's, if you're critical of him, that would be his legacy.
I tell you what I think his greatest failure is. It's who's in the White House now. That's the greatest failure. If you'd have said to Obama at any point in his administration, the guy that follows you is going to be the opposite of you. It's going to be Donald Trump, the guy that he ridicules. There's one particular moment in 2011 at the Press Club awards dinner when the president goes to talk to, make jokes really about the press and about his job, and he spends several minutes belittling Donald Trump, who sits there just taking it. And it's been observed, it's that moment that Donald Trump decides, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to run and I'm going to beat you. I think he'll go down in history, and he will go down in history, but not for what he did in office, but for what he represented. And what he represents is the remarkable ability of the American political system to transform itself, to go from this failing president of George W. Bush, and on the turn of one electoral cycle, to elect the near polar opposite in terms of life history, race, experience. And I think that's again reflected in Trump's election 8 years later. The American system gives you, it can transform one's expectations of the nation through its electoral system, and that's what he stands for. He shows that anyone can be president, and that's a remarkable achievement. If you looked at the nature of American history, the worst aspects of American history, from slavery through endemic racism, the notion, even 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, that a black man could be president would have been absurd. But the fact that we got a mixed race president does speak to America's capacity to change, and that's often undervalued. We often think it's dying as a political culture, as a nation, as a society, and I think that's not true. I think Obama, you don't have to agree with what Obama was trying to do to recognise that the mere fact that he won suggests America has the power to transform itself.
Well, being the first black president in the White House meant that he automatically alienated a percentage of the population who felt that were uncomfortable with that.
One of the legacies of his presidency is that the country has become more divided, because it's almost having him in the White House kind of exposed those deeper roots of racism and division, ideological division within the country. So in some ways he has both a kind of positive and a negative legacy, which is that he was able to show how radically different America could be if only we could confront, or if only they could confront, those deeper ideological and racial issues that actually really divide the country. And I think he showed that under strong leadership you can actually start to pull apart some of those deeper social problems.
He doesn't represent a revolution, and people expected him to be a revolutionary, both at home and abroad, and he didn't deliver that. And my illustration of this would be the campaign bumper sticker. You know, we had these posters in 2008 which were change and hope, yes we can. By 2012, when he runs again 4 years later, the bumper sticker is Bin Laden is dead, General Motors is alive. I killed the nastiest terrorist I could find, and I kept alive a greenhouse gas producing industry. He's gone from this great liberal progressive hope to being a very standard president who thinks in terms of economic self-interest and national security. So that's what I find in studying him. Those who come to know him better through research on him, I can't speak for everyone, my conclusion is he's more like the men before him than he's different, and that needs to be recorded and said. So we stop idolising him, thinking of him as a Superman. He's not that. We should judge him on the basis of the claims that he made, and as a regular politician.